Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Grote. I'm the Executive Director for the Greater Aurora Chamber of Commerce. And we're here for the ninth Real World Careers Meet the Professionals presentation. And we'll be talking with Jeffrey Markello, an attorney with Sakowski and Markello here in Alma. But, we're doing this. The purpose of doing this is to connect students and teachers directly with individuals in various careers and industries to provide a background and pathway to a possible career in that field. So, we've talked to a number of different people, and today we're very fortunate to have Jeff here. But before we start, I also wanted to thank Absolute Care of Aurora Park and Moog for sponsoring this. We really appreciate it. We couldn't do this without their help. And we ask you to please stay muted if you're listening. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat room and we'll answer them that way. But Jeff, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I know you've been involved in the practice of law here in the Greater Aurora area for a number of years. Can you talk about yourself, a little background and what led to your interest in law practice?
Sure, at least I'll try. Thank you very much for having me this morning. I actually didn't know I was going to be interested in law until after I went to college and had a little bit of an exposure to helping people. What I ended up doing, I took kind of a sideways path to get where I am. I was a little bit lopsided in my SATs coming out of high school and was told I was, going to be an engineer. And I believe that. And so I went to a school called RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where engineers go to be trained. And I realized very quickly that the hard sciences and some of what I was experiencing there really wasn't for me. I had some people skills that weren't being tapped into at RPI. And ultimately I transferred from an engineering focused career to a psychology career at the University of Rochester is where I ended up going. And I got my degree in psychology with a minor in poli-sci and management studies. And frankly, it wasn't even then that I knew I was going to go on to law school or become a lawyer. I took the LSAT a little bit on a lark my senior year of college. Because what I did know is that I loved learning. I loved going to school. And I didn't want to not go to school. I didn't want to enter the workforce. So in some ways, I said, well, law school is only going to open up more doors, right? I've got this liberal arts degree in psychology, which was a good foundation. And then I was fortunate enough to do well enough on the LSATs to get into UB Law School. What's interesting, they say, is that if you score well on the math portion of the SATs, that's often correlated with the LSATs. It has to do with logic and problem solving, as I understand it. So that was my path to law school. And then once I got into law school, to try to follow up with your question about my interest, I really did become very interested in helping people. And using my services, my talents to solve problems. And that's what lawyers do. We solve problems. And some problems need to be solved by third parties, judges or arbitrators, and other problems, lawyers can work out. So that's kind of where I landed, how I landed where I am.
That's interesting. Can you talk, just going back to the basic point of what you brought up, even before we get into the educational curriculum, what type of person? Obviously your personality lent itself to wanting to help people and to help people solve problems and things like that. Is that a pretty common characteristic of attorneys? For our students who are listening, that's, if they want to help people, this may really be a really good way to do that, a good option.
Well, I would say yes, depending on the field. The law is a broad field. There's a lot of areas in the law. But helping people is something my wife and I both do. She's a JD MSW, so she got her law degree and her social work degree at the same time. So that's very much in her blood, social work and helping people. There are areas of the law that are less focused in that area. I have colleagues that specialize in bankruptcy. Now they're helping people too, by the way. They're helping people get out of debt. But I have colleagues that are focused on, medical malpractice work, plaintiffs or defense, and they're helping people too, aren't they? They're helping their plaintiffs, the people who might have who have been injured, or they're defending somebody who may have been accused or wrongfully accused. The first 7 or 8 years of my career, I did a lot of criminal defense work where I was helping people who weren't otherwise able to afford counsel. You may have heard that sometimes if you're arrested, you have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford one can be appointed to represent you. I did a lot of that work, cutting my teeth on criminal defense work and helping people and dealing with people who were, challenged and facing struggles that a kid from East Aurora, where I grew up, wasn't necessarily facing. So it's funny. I come from a family of doctors, physicians. My dad was a doc, and there was a preconceived notion that lawyers are sharks and we're out there to, make money at other people's expense. I don't see the law that way at all. And my family, I think, has kind of come around to that and recognize, some of the important work that gets done helping people.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about, okay, so we talked a little bit about the personality and how it may lend itself to being a successful lawyer or following your interests, but then you talked about the different types of practice that there are. And you said there's such a broad range. Can you talk about those for a little bit?
Sure. I touched a little bit on criminal law. And so in every criminal matter, you've got criminal defense attorneys defending those folks who are accused of crimes. And you've got prosecutors they work generally for the district attorney's office, or for the lower level crimes. Various towns have town prosecutors that prosecute things like traffic offenses, that sort of thing, that are generally considered the non-misdemeanors and felonies. I referenced a little bit personal injury law, and you've seen plenty of advertisements on TV where attorneys, and that can be a lucrative area, where attorneys are looking to represent folks who have suffered serious personal injuries. And in that instance, those attorneys, will negotiate with an insurance company or insurance defense attorneys to try to achieve some resolution that is fair and just, ideally. Bankruptcy law, I touched on, and that's for folks that do a lot of, that run into people who their clients have hit hard times, and they're looking to try to dig themselves out of a hole. We've got, there's a lot of civil litigation. I do a lot of corporate work for small businesses. So if you want to start a small business, maybe a limited liability company, you come to a general practice attorney like myself, and we can set you up in a way that will help ideally isolate your personal assets from those of your business assets, such that if you were to be sued, your personal assets wouldn't be exposed. There's elder law. I've got an appointment at 10 o'clock today and a little bit this morning, where I'm going to be meeting with some clients to sign wills and powers of attorneys and living wills and healthcare proxies to help them plan, do some estate planning. There's a variety of different areas of law. And by the way, as an attorney, and really as a general practice attorney, I think it's critical that lawyers not dabble in areas in which they're not facile, that they're not experienced in. And if somebody were to come to me with a tax law question, the first thing I would do is refer them out to an expert, because that's an area that I'm not an expert in. And I wouldn't want to give somebody advice that wasn't the best advice.
Well, that's good, because that's a good lead into my next question. How do you find that pathway? I mean, obviously you have a special interest, but of all those areas that you mentioned, how do you find what you truly want to do and find a niche that's good for you and gives you satisfaction too?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think I've found my niche, but I'm not sure. I sometimes walk out of the office at the end of the day thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? It's just, are we going to make payroll this week? And are we, I've got unhappy clients or people who are frustrated and angry with me. A lot of the work that I do actually is appointed work from Supreme and Family Court judges, where I'm often assigned to represent children in custody and visitation battles. That's another area of the law that I didn't touch on before, family law. And in those circumstances, I'll meet with kids, anybody under the age of 18, infants, newborns, to kids up until the age of 18, and talk to them about the challenges that their parents are going through, whether it's in family court with an unmarried couple or in Supreme Court with a married couple that's getting divorced. And we talk about everything from custody to visitation, holidays, and other things. That work is work by which I don't get paid directly by the client. The child doesn't pay me, but the state does. And what's interesting perhaps about that, and some of the burnout that lawyers like me occasionally feel, is that the rates at which attorneys for children are paid haven't been adjusted since 2004. So we're being paid in 2022 the same way we were being paid 18 years ago. And frankly, I can't afford it. I've got staff to keep going. I've got overhead. I've got an office I've got to maintain. And so I've really cut back intentionally on those kinds of cases, which is unfortunate because I'm frankly really good at that area of law. It's a bit of an expertise. Domestic violence in particular is an expertise of mine, in which I'm able to help mitigate or ameliorate the problems that kids are sometimes facing when their parents are breaking up.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's something that you can get very involved with, and it affects you personally too, but you feel that there's a value that you bring to it. Like you said, you feel you're very good at that, and that you can help them. And I guess that's what I was trying to get to. How do you find that niche for yourself?
And I really did try a bunch of different things. Like I said, I started out with a lot of criminal defense work. I got a little exasperated and burnt out in that area. I ended up doing a fair amount of family court work where I was representing parents accused of neglecting their kids or abusing children. And I found that to be taxing, and I got burnt out in that. And representing children, I find to be rewarding in many respects, not financially, but personally rewarding.
Right. If we can back up a little, I have some other questions that'll kind of lead into what you're talking about, but I want to make sure we cover the educational aspect. You talked about your pathway into getting to law school. Let's talk about a typical way. If a student was interested in law right off the bat, what's the process, or what's the pathway?
Well, my recommendation is that if somebody was interested in law, that they pursue a liberal arts education at a college where they're getting a broad range of topics that don't necessarily have to be in the hardcore sciences. When you get to law school, it's a 3-year program. So after you achieve your bachelor's degree, and you have to have a bachelor's degree and complete college, after you achieve that diploma, you go to law school. And UB is a tough law school these days. I'm not sure I could still get in the way I got in back in 1987. But in any event, that's a 3-year program to get what's called a JD, a jurisprudence doctorate. So it's like a PhD or an MD, but it's a JD. After you get your JD, then you have to sit for the bar exam. And every state has its own bar exam to ensure that you understand the laws of that state, because the laws of New York are different from the laws of Pennsylvania, and different from Connecticut, New Jersey, and California, and Texas, and every other state. And so there's a multi-state portion of the bar that speaks to a very fundamental, foundational understanding of the constitutional law and federal law. And then there is a state-specific bar. You take that bar exam, and that's a 2 or 3 day exam. And then when you pass that, then you get to be admitted to the bar. And the bar, when you'll hear lawyers talk about the bar, we're not talking about the bar bill or misters or rookies. We're talking about the profession of practicing law.
And I think, as you said, each state has their own bar exam that an attorney, if they want to practice in that state, would need to complete. That's
right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right. The way it works typically is that you've got, some states have their personal bar exam. For example, I'm admitted both in New York and Massachusetts. So I took the New York bar on Tuesday. The multi-state was on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I flew to Massachusetts, to Boston, and I took the Mass bar figuring, heck, I've been working my tail off, studying really hard. Why not take another bar, which I did. And so I'm admitted to both, although I've never practiced in Massachusetts.
Okay, let's change the topic a little bit in terms of the types of practice. I mean, in terms, you talked about you in your business as a smaller type of firm. They're independent attorneys, I would guess, who work on their own, but then there are others who may work in a larger firm. How do you determine where you fit into that, or what your interest would be? And I guess to look back to in terms of the educational process, when you're going through for your law degree, does that curriculum for the law degree offer opportunities for you to experience other types of practices, other different size firms, be intern, or those kinds of stuff?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about those folks who want to or who prefer to work for themselves or work for others, I suppose. When you're in law school, just like any other educational program, and I've got a kid in college now who is very engaged in internships. There are internships available for law students. And when I was in school, I interned at a medical malpractice defense firm in downtown Buffalo, where I spent probably between 16 and 20 hours a week at the law firm, reading depositions and transcripts and summarizing, doing case law research and writing briefs or memorandums of law, helping the partners who are going to take some of that work and take them into court with them at that time. So there are opportunities to do that. I tried to get into intern with the district attorney's office. I remember in particular wanting to do that. But as I said, my dad was a doc. I wasn't very politically connected. And it seems like if you want to get into that area, you need to, there's some politics involved, let's put it that way. There are a lot of positions at some of those larger law firms, though, that are available to non-attorneys. So, for example, if you're going to work for a law firm with 50 or more lawyers, there will be a whole staff of legal secretaries and paralegals that are managing a lot of the paperwork and the files for the lawyers, or helping the lawyers along in one way or another. In my office, we have a secretary and a paralegal. Our paralegal is dedicated primarily, it seems, mostly to real estate. So one of the things we do, and I didn't mention this area of law, is real estate transactions. So those clients of ours who are looking to buy a house or sell a house need help, and we're here to help them. And we help them buy or sell, or sometimes we represent a lender, a financial institution, setting that up as well. But to try to get back to your initial question, I don't know that when I was in law school, I knew that I wanted to work in a small office like I am now, like my career has taken me, or if I wanted to work in a large firm downtown. I have a lot of colleagues that I'm very close friends with who work in large firms and also in small offices like we have here in East Aurora. But I don't know that I have a good answer for you on that.
No, I mean, I think you answered it, that there's, it depends on the individual and what their experience might be, what their interest might be. And they may go from one to the other too, I would guess, so.
All the time. You'll have a lot of attorneys working in large firms, recognizing at some point that they don't want to be working for other people necessarily, other partners. And there's politics everywhere, right? So there's politics in large firms where, you put a half dozen people together and not everyone's going to get along all the time. And so they branch off onto their own practices all the time.
Well, let's talk about another area of law that may not be directly tied to the being, and I guess it may be. You can inform us on that. Becoming a judge, and which are some are appointed or elected types of positions. Can you talk a little bit about that? How that comes about?
Sure. Consistent with my theme of community service and helping people, I was first elected in 2009 as an Aurora town judge, and that was following. I had served 3 terms on the East Aurora Board of Education, and then 7 years as the town prosecutor, and now I've been on the bench in the town of Aurora since 2009. And for me, that's my way really of giving back to my community, being part of the community, being connected and involved, and really keeping tabs on things and trying to help people. I mean, let's face it, as a judge, I feel like a lot of the work I do is is geared toward behavior modification. So we run into people who are misbehaving or making poor judgments or poor decisions, and they end up in front of a judge. And it's not all about the consequence. It's not all about the fine, whether or not I'm going to send them to jail or otherwise. It's hopefully about modifying their behavior so that they won't make the same errors in the future. Now, with regard to judges, I'm elected. So the town of Aurora has elected me on each of my terms. I'm in my 4th term now. And is that right? Let's see, 2009, 2013, 2017, 2021. Yeah, I guess I was elected to my 4th term. It's hard to believe. And then, and those are 4-year terms. So that's what town judges. So in Holland, for example, there are 2 town judges. Every town has 2 judges, and they're both elected. In county court, those are all elected judges. They're elected by the whole county, not just the town of Holland or the town of Aurora. In state Supreme Court, they're elected by everybody in their judicial district. So we currently are in what they call the 8th judicial district. To get on the ballot for Supreme Court's a little different. That's all about politics, because you don't win a primary to get on the ballot. In Supreme Court, you have to be conferred that privilege by the local parties. The Erie County Democrat, or the Democrats and the Republicans typically will pick their candidates and then run them for Supreme Court. That's different from federal court. In federal court, all of those judges are appointed. They are not elected. So the federal court judges are recommended to Congress, and then Congress or the president can make the appointment that gets conferred by the Senate. Ultimately, I said Congress, but it's really the Senate who makes that decision.
Well, let's do this first. I don't know if there are students there in Holland, or if there are any questions. We'll give them a chance to ask. Just, through the chat room. We'll give you a second to do that. Any questions, Holland students? Okay, well, think about it. If you have any questions or anything, just put them in, and we'll go on here. Excuse me. So, we've talked about a whole range of things. I don't know okay. Here's a question, Jeff. How much is law school, and how many years? I think you talked about how many years already, but what is the cost?
Well, thank you for asking. Those are good questions. Law school is a 3-year program. By the way, it can be 4 years if you want to get what they call an LLM. That's the next step beyond a JD, and it's a specialization in a certain area of law. Typically, it's tax law, but it can be other things as well. And what does it cost is all over the board. Let me put it this way. I graduated college from the University of Rochester, and I ended up going to SUNY Buffalo's law school. My entire SUNY Buffalo law school career cost less than 1 year at the University of Rochester, University of Rochester. So that's 3 years of a public school, the SUNY system, costing less than a private school 1 year. I guess that's my way of saying that if there are a lot of private law schools too. I was not too long ago, I have a kid who's a senior in high school, and he was looking at Syracuse University, and has elected not to go there. But that law school is far more expensive. You probably, I don't know exactly what the cost of law school is these days, but I would say that I wouldn't be surprised that to learn the Syracuse Law School might be in the $75,000 or more per year range, whereas UB's law school, and I don't know this for sure, is probably still a third of what that might be, or even less.
Yeah.
So the cost really is going to very much depend on private versus public education, and I don't think necessarily that going to a private school provides any better education. I have a lot of really wonderful colleagues with whom I graduated from the University of Buffalo who are absolutely brilliant, and I guess that's the way I would answer that question.
Okay, all right. Any other questions, guys, from Holland? Just throw them up there if you have them. Okay, we'll wait. Okay, is the law field stable and how many hours do you work a day? I guess that's a good question. If you're looking at balance between work and personal time and life, what do you say?
Yeah, I'll address the second half of that initially. The law is what you make it. When you work for yourself, they say you can work half time, and that means half the day and half the night. So and that's what I've learned to understand. And so, and whether that you're in the field of law or you're in any field, if you're working for yourself, you do what you can to make your clients happy and make your customers happy and deliver on what you're supposed to deliver. And so it's not unusual, unfortunately, for me to be at the office late. Your mind is always working as a lawyer. That is to say, anybody who wants to punch a clock and punch out should not go into the law, because you are constantly thinking about your clients and their cases and how you can help them. You're thinking about arguments. I'm on trial a lot. And as I'm readying for trial, whether I'm in the shower or getting dressed in the morning or trying to go to sleep at night, I'm often thinking about how can I craft this argument in such a way as to achieve my client's goals, to try to persuade the judge or persuade the jury to find in my client's favor. And those kinds of things, that really never stops if you're a lawyer. That's not to say you can't leave the office, walk out and go home and spend time with your family. Yesterday, my kid right now is playing in the sectionals. And so section 6 is a tennis player. So today are the semis and finals. So I'm going to be leaving the office at about 2 o'clock or 2:15 because the photographs start at 2:30 and the semis start at 3 o'clock. And so my clients are going to be put on the back burner because some things are more important. And it's tough sometimes to draw a line between determining your professional obligations and how important those are versus your family, your desires to spend time with your family. So that's a tough thing. And is the law field stable? There are some areas that are very stable. I can tell you there will always be divorces. There will always be people breaking up. There will always, so matrimonial law and family law is one area that's very stable. There will always be people who get themselves in trouble financially. Bankruptcy law, people would argue, is stable. There will always be people who get themselves arrested and make poor decisions and get criminal charges against them. Criminal law is stable. I would think the law generally as a field is a stable field. You're not going to see it hit a big rut where there's no need for lawyers anymore. That's just not going to happen. We always will need lawyers. And by the way, lawyers can do good things outside the law. Most of those politicians in Congress on the federal level or even on the state level are often trained lawyers, and they can use that training, how to think critically, and solve problems to really further their political career as well.
Okay, that's a really good point. 2 other questions. And I think you kind of addressed this one already just by the bar exam question. Do you get clients from other states?
Rarely. We periodically, in my real estate practice, I'll periodically have somebody coming in from another state because they want to buy a home in East Aurora or Holland, and so I'm representing them. But it has to do with a local part of the law, or I'll have people that are that own property in Western New York that are from out of state, and I've got to deal with them. There's different taxing consequences associated with that, so I periodically am dealing with clients from other states, but by and large, the vast majority of at least my clientele and most of those who work in New York State come from our local residents and citizens here in New York State.
Okay, and this is an interesting question, I guess. The pandemic affected a lot the last few years. How did it affect your job?
Well, I can tell you this, the pandemic has made lawyers better and made the system more efficient. When I say the system, I mean the judicial system. Prior to the pandemic, I don't know that I had never made a court appearance virtually. Every court appearance I made, and I'm in court a lot. As in family court, I can be in 3 or 4 different courts in a single day, sometimes in a single morning. I'm going from court to court to court to court. And that was all physically in the court building, going between different parts. That's what they call courtrooms, parts in the family court and Supreme Court and any of the downtown court buildings. Now, since the pandemic, all of the lawyers and judges and court system has become facile with the use of what they call Microsoft Teams, which is very much like Zoom. And so the judge will, there's an appointed time, everybody logs on. I'm sitting here at my desk in my office right now, and this is where I, appeared in court yesterday, and I will appear later this morning in another court proceeding on the same laptop that I'm talking on. And that's a skill set that I didn't have before. None of us did in terms of lawyers. And it's frankly more efficient because I don't have to get my car, drive 25 minutes downtown, park, walk into the courthouse, wait, and all that stuff. I can just log on. And the pandemic has in some ways really improved, I think, the practice of law. One of the other things I did as a town judge, I was what they call I was in charge of virtual arraignments. So for a week, I would take all the arraignments of those felony arrests throughout Erie County. So whether it was a Grand Island or Lancaster or Brant, you name it, I'd get the call from that police agency, and they'd have the defendant in custody at the police station. I would log on from my home. I'd conduct the arraignment, which is that process by which you just make sure that the defendant has an attorney and knows their rights, understands what the charges are against them, and then you schedule it for further proceedings. And I was, as a virtual arraignment judge, able to do that for every jurisdiction throughout Erie County from my own office at home. So that was remarkable. The pandemic, in some ways, this sounds twisted perhaps, but has made the legal profession better.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting. Another question, you kind of talked about this a little bit too, but family court can be emotionally taxing. How do you deal with that?
It can be really taxing. And I'm thinking right now some cases I have that are very emotionally taxing. Like I said, one of my areas of expertise is domestic violence. And so a lot of times I'll have lawyers and judges speak to me about domestic violence. Forgive me. I've got a case. No. I've got a case that is coming back tomorrow that I'm getting ready for. It's a Supreme Court. It's a matrimonial case. The father is horrifically domestically violent. There are a lot of guns involved. Guns are a sensitive subject matter right now, but what I can tell you is that they are the #1 tool for domestic violence perpetrators to manipulate their victims. And, I've dealt with kids who've seen their mothers get beat up and abused. And, it is emotionally taxing. Family court can be. But, that some of those experiences, I think, have made me a better judge because I'm able to understand the perspective of the victim a little bit and really better understand anyways, what makes the perpetrator tick. Because I've dealt with so many of them over the years, and I have, it's a sad area of the law, and it can be tough. I appreciate the questioner for recognizing how emotionally taxing family court can be, because it can be overwhelming sometimes. I'll tell you that.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate your heartfelt response on that, Jeff, and thanks to the student who asked the question.
Yeah.
But why don't we look at wrapping up? I don't know, Jeff, if you have any last comments before we go for our students.
Well, I guess what I would say is, notwithstanding how emotionally I can get sometimes about my work, I'm very invested in my work, and I try to do the very best I can for every client. And I think you're going to find that's a general theme for across lawyers across the board. We are serving clients. We're people servers. We're not selling widgets. We're not selling items. We are our time is valuable because it's sought by many clients all at once, and we have to be careful about those cases we take and those cases we don't take. So, for example, if I take a case that involves Gary Grote and somebody else wants to retain me at a later time because they're unhappy with Gary Grote, I have to turn that case away because my attorney-client privilege and confidentiality extends strictly to Gary Grote. And I will never do anything that would be contradictory to the best interests of my client. So there are, we have a lot of conflicts that we have to kind of navigate, and a lot of attorney-client privilege. We got a lot of secrets. Everything that a client says to an attorney in the course of their relationship is privileged. And I've had clients tell me things about crimes they've committed. And now I can't do anything about that if they're my clients. I can't call the police and share, blow them in, but I can counsel them on how to best handle that predicament that they might find themselves in, and how to, try to navigate the dicey waters. And so those are some of the things that make lawyers work, not just 8 hours a day, not just 10 or 12 hours a day, but around the clock, really. And so it's one of those professions that you really need to love it to get into it, in my experience anyways.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. Thanks for our students for being part of this. We truly appreciate it. This is really a good presentation, and I hope our students got the really good meaning that you wanted to bring to this presentation. So thank you again. I'd just like to thank our sponsors again, Absolute Care of Aurora Park and Mo, for being part of this. And that our next presentation, our last one for the school year, will be Wednesday, June 1st at 9 a.m. And we'll be talking with Mary Jo Bartron, who with her husband is the owner of Earth Dimensions. They'll be talking about environmental and geotechnical investigations. So that should be very interesting also. So again, Jeff, thank you very much. Truly appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thanks very much, Gary.
Okay.
Enjoy, everybody. Good luck.